Now that I've finished the journey, the cycle through all the boys of the BTS group, let's react to group performances of all the boys together. Of course, I'll mix this with some of their individual performances. Now, let's look for other group performances from 2020 onwards in the last 3 to 4 years. This is due to the context of that video that wasn't supposed to be made but was. Watch it if you want to understand. BTS failed live, as I had put in the cover. I chose this version of the song called Spring Day, which is a BTS song that talks about longing, loss, and hope. It conveys this idea. People gave me some suggestions, and I saw some that were highly requested. But I like this version because it's from 2 or 3 years ago, and it has an audio that presents the voices quite independently and with little alteration. You can notice here that it was minimally modified, but only in terms of balancing lows and highs to make the voice slightly more uniform with the playback sound and the voice among all of them. So it's a good version to listen to. The characteristics of each one, so let's see what they deliver.
보고 싶다 이렇게 말하니까 더 보고 싶다 너의 사진을 보고 있어도 보고 싶다 너무 약속한 시간 나는 우리가 믿다 이제 얼굴만 보는 것조차 힘들어진 우리가.
So here, I even wrote down the boys' names. This one, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's J-Hope. He has this breathiness, a hoarseness in his voice when he delivers his rap. Here, which is a rap mixed with melody, and this brings a bit more aggression to the melody. And it's quite interesting within this context, where we're talking about longing and loss, to introduce this aspect of pain.
여긴 온통 겨울보냐 말월에도 겨울이 와 남은 시간을 달려갔네 홀로 남은 설국 열차 네 손 잡고 지구 반대편까지 가 겨울을 끝내고 봐 그리움들이 얼마나 눈처럼 내려 그 봄날이올까.
So RM has a voice that is quite imposing compared to the other boys. It's in a much lower range. Here, listening to him, he seems like a baritone or maybe a bass baritone. In that song, if I'm not mistaken, he reached on A2 or AG2. I don't recall now. If he reaches G2, he's probably a bass baritone. And he's delivering the entire rap and even the fluctuations he makes with a certain intonation within this rap. He follows the melody of the song, but within the entire vocal aesthetic, the orality that is characteristic of rap. Jimmy's voice then, it carries this characteristic of crying, delicacy, but more focused on an emotion, which is more delicate, but also a bit sadder. Of course, this depends on the song, but I'm trying to understand a bit more within this context. So here is a subjective impression from a classical music singer with the type of technique I use. So It's perhaps a different perspective than what is usually seen. He has. Here it shows a lot of that metallic quality and brightness that he has, and his voice is not. I would say it's about 60% nasal and 40% vocal, oral, where the resonance predominates between the mouth and the nose. It's not a purely nasal voice, but it's also not purely vocal. He has a small mouth opening. Normally, his mouth is not very open. This I also noticed in the first analysis that I did of him. He maintains this delicacy. To also emphasize this register, which is quite high, and leaving the resonance in the nose and mouth. So if he put a bit more emphasis on the nose, his voice could become very strident, potentially becoming disproportionate and, depending on the listener, even unpleasant. But he maintains a good balance within this vocal characteristic of his timbre, and he emphasizes this quality, so it sounds very beautiful.
공이 떠도는 작은 먼지처럼 작은 먼지처럼 날리는 눈이 나라면 조금 더 빨리 내게 닿을 수 있을 텐데 눈꽃이
These voice is truly a voice that is very imposing, very projected, and rounded. It's a very frontal voice, placed on the syllable. Everything he does is on. He doesn't do. You know, everything goes into the on. So his voice is upward. Probably, hearing him speak, he might have a voice somewhat like this, naturally. I'm guessing, I've never heard him speaking. But probably his speaking voice is like this. He has this rounder face and head. This also allows him to have this type of projection naturally. But when singing as well, he places it in what we would call. It depends, though. I wouldn't say he's in belting, although here he's in the high range. But I think the belting is open because it's very high for him, and they wanted to create this interpretation to bring this full characteristic in a high range. It's a high range for him. So I believe he's using open belting, and this brings some brightness, but his voice is so rounded. It's a bit rounded and velvety. So, the brightness he brings isn't the kind of brightness you hear, for example, in Jimmy's voice. It's as if you're hearing little stars, very high frequencies around his main frequency. His voice is very velvety, rounded, full, large, and with a lot of volume. And his voice contrasts a lot with RM's rap. The two create a strong contrast compared to the other boys. And what's interesting, the higher notes he hits, he could have gone into falsetto, which is what they usually do in higher ranges, but here he wanted to show strength. So this strength is like a cry, within the context of suffering, that the song is conveying. So, it makes sense that when the idea is this, you use a full voice in this chest or mixed voice range, higher up, come with strength and not delicacy. Since they're together, the other boys can handle the delicacy. Very good transition by Jungkook from mixed voice to falsetto and returning without noticing the transition, just like we saw in that live performance. If he does it live, here he clearly masters it with ease, because It's a song that, a calm performance, seated, and his voice feels like a mix of the other boys. He's the one who embodies a bit of the qualities of all the others. I don't know if there's a leader in the group. Usually groups have one, but I'm not sure if it's him. But at least vocally, he's the one who can be that middle voice that has a bit of the characteristics of all the timbres within himself. It's a very beautiful voice.
떨어져요 또 조금씩 멀어져요 보고 싶다 보고 싶다 보고 싶다 보고 싶다 얼마나
Jin did a few. He hit some low notes here, mid to low. It was very smooth. He had the backing vocals alongside him, and I think they were in parallel lines, not exactly the same as his. It seems to me, I'm not sure if they're doing the exact same line as him, and it's covering him because of the low range. I have my doubts, but I'll say that the backing vocals were in a parallel melody.
기다려요 또 몇 밤을 더 세워요 널 보게 될까 널 보게 될까 만나게 될까 만나게 될까 정겨울
By the way, Jim nailed that low note really well. If I'm not mistaken, I hadn't heard such pronounced low notes in the reaction I did of him. They are well executed, and I really see a similarity that I had already noticed between Jin, Jungkook, and V. Forgive me if I got someone's name wrong here or if I'm calling someone by another's name. But in any case, Jungkook, Jin, and V, even though V has that characteristic I mentioned earlier, the three of them have a vocal similarity, especially Jungkook and Jin.
될까 만나게 될까 만나게 될까 정겨울 끝을 지나 다시 봄날이 올 때까지 꽃 피울 때까지 그곳에 좀 더 머물러줘 머물러줘
There are two melodic lines here, and I didn't understand what he is actually doing. Whether he's doing that falsetto voice, or if he's in a low register. There is an octave here, in parallel. I think he's doing the lower voice here. I can't tell. I don't think he has such a low voice to do an octave below here. You tell me in the comments what he actually sings. But from what I saw in the last reaction I did of him, I would say that I think he's actually doing the falsetto voice.
네가 변한 건지 아니면 내가 변한 건지 이 순간 흐르는 시간조차 미워 우리가 변한 거지 모두가 그런 거지 그럽니다 네가 넌 떠났지만 난 하루도 넌 잊은 적이 없었지 솔직히 보고 싶은데 이만 너를 지우기 그게 너 원망하기보다 더 나쁘니까
And Suga always. Well, not always. You tell me if he always has this really more raw, more aggressive characteristic. In all of their songs, he came with the more hip-hop and heavier part. I saw that in his solo show. In all the songs, he has this heavier vibe. I think someone told me he likes rock, if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember now because there are so many comments I tried to respond to. But this memory came to me now. If he likes it, it's quite interesting, this fact of being in this vibe that is different from the group's vibe in this melodic and musical sense. So really, Jin has the characteristic of always singing in belting, which Jungkook also has. That's also why they have a great similarity in timbre when comparing the two, as they are really quite similar. Both sing with that belting, openness. In his case, it's not such a nasal belting, but he really has a great ease in that mixed voice from the mid to high range, in all the transitions. And maybe that low note back there that I had mentioned, maybe it doesn't have as much low in volume because of that, because his ease in the high notes is quite remarkable. He is a tenor or baritone, I don't recall now. But the high notes are very well executed, and he is very relaxed. He has a lot of quality indeed. And since he is in the high range, which is a more comfortable region for him, he has much more volume here than in the first phrase. Did you notice that whenever Jimin has this cheek opening, which is a lateral opening, he uses it to emphasize those characteristics I mentioned. This also brings the voice a bit more toward the direction of vocal opening. This opening is the minimum of the internal opening of a smile, and he can either actually smile or just do it internally. And there are ways to do it, because depending on how you do it, you can place the voice more in the nose or keep it more forward in the region of the front teeth. You can leave it in a middle region. And in his case, he does this mix, placing it in the nose and in the vocal. I always find these transitions that Jungkook does very beautiful. From falsetto to head voice or to chest voice, he always does it very well. Jin also does this very well. He has a very balanced volume. V comes with a tremendous power because he is in his highest high notes. So you notice a very big contrast in V's power compared to the other boys, like Jin for example. I don't even need to mention Jimin because his voice sounds tiny next to theirs. I won't consider the rappers here because that's more of a spoken voice, a bit different. But it's quite noticeable, this volume difference. OFV compared to the other boys. And also, the balance that Jungkook and Jin have. This uniformity really brings this characteristic of the group's timbre being more centered on them. Every time he makes this transition, he adds the yodel, which is that. A slight break where he goes into falsetto and returns in a matter of milliseconds, which gives that sense of crying and pain. And within that power he has in this super high range, he needed to fit something that would bring this notion of pain and crying, a slightly softer feeling. For V, it was necessary at that moment.
세워야 널 보게 될까 널 보게 될까 만나게 될까 만나게 될까
Now that I've noticed more of Jin's volume in this region, but there's still this backing vocal that I don't like. I prefer to hear the pure voice. If it could be without playback, just guitar or piano would be what I like to hear.
널 보게 될까 만나게 될까 만나게 될까 You know it all You're my best friend 아침은 다시 올 거야
Very good transition coming back from falsetto and using a lot of the whisper voice technique. Where you at? A breath equality. He showed good technical quality in a high range that isn't comfortable for him here.
You know it all You're my best friend 아침은 다시 올 거야
The notes are always rounded, very beautiful.
어둠도 어떤 계절도 영원할 순 없으니까
I don't know if you notice now with Jin singing right after him. You can understand the contrast between the enormity of volume and power from V because of his vocal range. He's in a much higher region. But out of all that I said, did you see the contrast between him and Jin? And also in relation to all the others, but the two side by side made it very clear. The calmness of Jin, at the same pitch hitting the notes, but V with high effort. For example, me singing notes that, as a bass, singing notes that are mid and low for tenors. I'll be in a very full voice, very rich, covering. Depending on who's next to me, I'll be covering their voice, while the tenor will be there calmly. So you have this combination, and that's what's beautiful about this group, having this variety of voices, especially now that they're older, with all these different characteristics. This is what brings sonic richness to the group outside the studio, because as I said in that video, for me, the studio destroys the unique qualities of each artist. Of course, these are different approaches and it's not necessarily bad. Pop has its place, just as live performance has its place. They're different things. But if we want to truly see the real technical quality of the singer, it's here, it's live. Here we see all these nuances, and it's truly flavorful. There are several different characteristics, and there isn't one that's better than the other. They are different characteristics, each with its own quality. So there's no point in arguing because this one is better or that one is better. That doesn't exist. They're different. It's impossible. It's like comparing pineapple to banana. It doesn't make sense. You might, due to your personal taste, because of your subjectivity, not like one voice or the other. For example, I prefer the voices of V and Jungkook. And many prefer Jin's and Jimin's. But this is entirely a matter of your ear, and what appeals to you. But that doesn't mean one voice is better than the other. All of them. Excluding all that history we've already talked about. But today, all of them are elite singers. That's it. They all have vocal quality. Now, observe the contrast. Then came V and Jin. One with a lot, with a huge voice, then Jin's balance, and now the super delicacy of Jimin. So, do you see how the characteristics of each voice bring contrast and richness to the music? The three of them are singing the same melodic line, and it's a simple song, in terms of melody. So you also enrich it with the different characteristics of the 6 or 7 boys who are there. That makes everything much more interesting. It's not a song I like. It's not a song I would choose to listen to, because it's definitely not my taste. But observe the richness you can perceive in this performance, due to the differences between them, as each voice is distinct from the other. If everyone had the same voice, if all 7 had the same voice as Jungkook and Jin, it would be boring and monotonous to listen to the group live, because it's the same. It can't be, there has to be a difference. Even between Jin and Jungkook, there are differences, as I said. But the contrast Jin brought here was perfect, it enriched the song. Now Jungkook is singing the same line as the other 3. He's like Jin but with a bit more aggressiveness. And the transition he makes to the higher note, coming out of that belting and mixed voice into a head voice, or going into falsetto, but I think he went into head voice here. But that also gives a different characteristic from the other boys. Look at the falsetto. He did. It was good. You could notice a bit of the transition, but the shift and return were very well done. He's in a voice that's not falsetto, he's in head voice. So much so that he came out of those 1 or 2 notes he was declaiming on top, went down 1 or 2 notes, but maintained the same resonance, the same sonic characteristic, which indicates that he was really in that voice of, in his head voice, very delicate and with low volume. The microphone is very close, and this indicates low volume. And this can be either in a fuller head voice or also in falsetto. But here he is in head voice with great delicacy. Hatch has switched to chest voice. And he switched to chest voice, and you can notice that the characteristic of that velvety and delicate sound has already changed to a more metallic and fuller voice. So, a very good performance here by BTS. So, starting the sequence of reactions to several other performances by them together. And I picked a longer performance for a longer reaction, because we can appreciate the richness of the sound of 7 voices that are quite unique. So, very much this here, I liked what I heard. It's a song that is not to my personal taste, but their vocal performance is truly exceptional here. Very good. I would like to see this song and other songs performed live on stage. To evaluate the performance. So, if you enjoyed this reaction, leave your like and comment below. Subscribe to the channel to see more videos like this. Consider supporting through the super thanks button or through the first link in the pinned comment. Alright, see you later.